Chapter 1. The chill of the viewing stone was a familiar misery. Elara kept her spine straight, her chin level, her gaze fixed on the intricate silver inlay of the throne across the grand hall. She did not look at the faces in the gallery, bloated with pity and contempt. She did not look at her father, Duke Valerius, whose stony profile was a monument to his disappointment. She certainly did not look at the line of eligible alphas who shuffled past, their sense a cloying mix of ambition and disdain. This was the third year she had been presented at the Great Hunt Conclave, and the third year she would be passed over. At 22, she was an antique, a tarnished relic on the mating market. An omega of a noble house with no wolf. It was more than a flaw, it was a void, an absence of the very thing that defined their people. A wolf was strength, instinct, life. She was nothing. A hollow shell, Alpha Kalen of the Sunwood Pack paused before her. He was young, handsome, with a predator's arrogance that usually made the Omega ladies flush and stammer. He sniffed the air around her, a deliberate, theatrical gesture. A sneer twisted his perfect lips. "Still nothing but dust and desperation, Lady Elara," he said, his voice carrying easily in the hall's charged silence. Laughter, sharp and cruel, trickled from the galleries. Elara's magic, the secret, useless thing she kept coiled tight in her gut, flared with shame. It was a weak, pathetic power, a quiet hum of empathy that told her exactly how much Kalen was enjoying this, how much her father was burning with rage, how the other Omegas in the line preened with relief that the focus of scorn was not on them. She met Kalen's eyes, her own placid and empty. "My apologies for disappointing your nose, Lord Kalen," she said, her voice a low, even murmur. "Perhaps you'll have better luck with the next candidate." His sneer deepened. He had wanted a reaction. Tears, a flush of anger, anything to confirm her weakness. Her stillness only irritated him. He made a show of wiping his hand on his tunic, as if he'd touched something unclean, and moved on. One by one they passed her. Some with a quick, dismissive glance. Others, like Kalen, with a calculated insult. Elara stood, a statue of polite indifference, while inside, her spirit crumbled to dust. She had learned long ago that fighting back only made it worse. Dignity was the only shield she possessed. Finally, the procession was over. The High Elder cleared his throat, ready to declare the conclave pairings, a pronouncement that would officially mark her for the third time as unclaimed, unwanted, broken. Her father's jaw was a knot of granite. This failure was a stain on his honor, a blight on the Valerius name. It was then that she felt a new gaze, heavy and absolute. It wasn't the pitying stare of a courtier or the sneer of a rival. This was different. It cut through the noise, the shame, the suffocating weight of the hall, and landed on her with the force of a physical touch. Slowly, Elara lifted her eyes to the source. On the obsidian throne sat Alpha King Theron. He was not a king who reveled in ceremony. He was a creature of silence and shadow, a ruler forged in the border wars that had nearly shattered the kingdom a decade ago. He was said to be more wolf than man, his own shift a terrifying spectacle of raw power that no one had witnessed in years. He ruled with an iron will and a chilling remoteness. He rarely attended these social rituals, and his presence today had sent a ripple of unease through the court. He was watching her. Not with pity or contempt or even curiosity. His gaze was unnervingly focused, analytical, like a master craftsman examining a piece of flawed but intriguing wood. His face, all hard planes and stark angles, was unreadable, but his eyes, the color of a winter storm, missed nothing. He saw Kalen's insult. He saw her unbowed posture. He saw her father's fury. He saw everything, and he was the only one in the entire hall who didn't seem to be looking at a failure. He seemed to be looking at an answer. The thought was so absurd, so nonsensical, that Elara dismissed it as a fantasy born of desperation. The High Elder's voice droned on, announcing the pairings. Elara tuned it out, preparing herself for the walk of shame back to her father's side, for the silent, condemning carriage ride home. But as the final pairing was announced and the hall began to stir with polite applause, a royal herald, his face pale, stepped forward. "A decree from the Alpha King," he stammered, his voice cracking under the sudden weight of every eye in the room. The hall fell silent once more. King Theron had not moved. His gaze was still locked on Elara. "Lady Elara of House Valerius," the herald announced, his voice trembling. "You are to present yourself to the king's private study, at once." A collective gasp swept the room. It was not a request, it was a summons, a command. Elara's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of bone. Her father's face was a mask of disbelief, a flicker of hope, warring with decades of ingrained disappointment. Kaelin stared, his jaw slack with shock. Elara felt the king's gaze pull at her. It wasn't a demand, but an undeniable gravity. With her legs shaking but her back ramrod straight, she descended from the viewing stone, her simple gray dress a smudge of color in the sea of jewels and silks. She walked the length of the great hall, the whispers of the court chasing her like hungry ghosts, and never once did the Alpha King look away. Chapter 2. The king's study was a cavern of silence and shadow. Bookshelves groaned under the weight of ancient leather-bound tomes. Maps of the kingdom were pinned to the walls, and the air smelled of old paper, wood smoke, and something else, something wild and clean, like a forest after a storm. It was the king's scent. King Theron stood by a tall, arched window, his formidable silhouette outlined by the pale moonlight. He had not spoken a word since she'd been ushered in by a grim-faced guard. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, and Elara found it strangely less terrifying than the noise of the court. Here there was no judgment, only a vast, waiting stillness. She stood in the center of the room, her hands clasped before her, and waited. She was used to waiting, waiting for a shift that never came, waiting for an acceptance that was never offered. Finally he turned. The moonlight caught the silver streaks at his temples, the hard line of his jaw. He was older than the alphas in the hall, his power seated not in youthful arrogance but in an unshakable, absolute certainty. "Lord Kaelin insulted you," he stated. It was not a question. Elara's throat was dry. "It is of no consequence, your majesty." "It is of consequence to me," he countered, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. "In my hall, under my watch. Why did you not react?" She blinked, surprised by the question. To what end? Tears would have earned his satisfaction. Anger would have earned his scorn. Silence. Silence offers nothing. A flicker of something, approval perhaps, passed through his storm-gray eyes. "You have learned to shield yourself." "A necessity," she murmured. He moved from the window, his steps silent for such a large man. He stopped before a massive oak desk, his fingers tracing the rim of a silver goblet. "The court sees you as broken, Lady Elara. Your father sees you as a disgrace. Tell me what you see." The question disarmed her. No one had ever asked for her own assessment. She was a known quantity, a defined failure. Her opinion on the matter was irrelevant. She took a careful breath, the scent of him stronger now, calming her frayed nerves in a way she couldn't explain. "I see. A woman who cannot give her house what it requires. A wolf. Is that all you are? A vessel for a wolf. To our people, it is the most important thing, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Honesty felt dangerous, but lies felt pointless with this man. He would see right through them. Tradition is the memory of the pack, he said, his gaze intense. But sometimes, memory becomes a cage. It stops us from seeing what is right in front of us. He paused, letting the words settle in the space between them. I have a position to offer you. Elara's mind went blank. A position? Was this some form of charity? A way to spare her father further humiliation? Your Majesty? The Royal Archivist passed last winter. His records are a disaster. I require someone with a meticulous mind, a respect for knowledge, and the patience to sit in silence for long hours. Someone who is not easily distracted by court gossip or political maneuvering. His eyes held hers. Someone the court overlooks. The offer was so unexpected, so practical. It had nothing to do with mates or bloodlines or wolves. It was a job, a task for which she was uniquely suited. She had spent most of her life in her father's library, finding solace in the quiet company of books when the company of her own kind was too painful. I am honored, Your Majesty, she stammered, but I have no experience in managing a royal archive. You can read, you can think, you will learn, he said with an air of finality. You will be housed in the scholar's wing. Your work begins at dawn. I will expect a preliminary report on the state of the archives in 1 week. He was dismissing her. It was that simple. He had seen a problem, found a tool to fix it, and was now setting that tool to its task. There was no romance in it, no hidden meaning, and yet Elara felt a strange, unfamiliar flutter of something that felt dangerously like hope. He wasn't offering her pity. He was offering her a purpose. There is one more thing, he said as she turned to leave. She paused, her hand on the heavy oak door. Yes, Your Majesty? My court is a nest of vipers. They will see my patronage as a weakness to be exploited. They will test you. I am used to being tested, she said quietly. I am aware, he replied, his voice softening for the first time. But here, you are under my protection. If you have need of me, you will send word. Do you understand? She understood the words, but not the sentiment behind them. Protection was for the valued, the cherished. She was neither. Still, she inclined her head. I understand. As she walked through the silent, torchlit corridors of the palace, the weight of the court's judgment seemed, for the first time, a little lighter. She had a place, a purpose, and the most powerful man in the kingdom had given it to her. She didn't understand why, but as she settled into the small Spartan room in the scholar's wing, the scent of old books a comforting balm, she realized she didn't need to. For the first time since she was a child, waiting for a shift that never came, she had something to look forward to at dawn. The royal archives were less a library and more a crypt for forgotten knowledge. Dust lay thick as snow on everything, and the air was stale with the decay of parchment and leather. It was a disaster, just as the king had said, and Elara loved it. Here she was not the broken Omega or the Valerius disgrace. She was simply the archivist. She spent her days in blissful solitude, painstakingly cataloging scrolls, mending the spines of crumbling books, and bringing order to a century of chaos. Her empathy, so often a curse in the crowded court, was a gift here. It let her feel the echoes of the scribes who had come before her, the faint impressions of history clinging to the objects she handled. The king came often. He never announced his visits. He would simply appear, a silent shadow in the doorway, and watch her work. Sometimes he would ask a question about a specific treaty or a forgotten bloodline. Other times he would just stand there, his presence a steady, grounding weight in the quiet room. Elara initially found his visits unnerving. She misread his interest as scrutiny, a test of her competence. She would stiffen, her answers becoming clipped and formal, expecting him to find fault in her work at any moment. But he never did. One afternoon, he found her perched precariously on a tall ladder, reaching for a heavy ledger on the top shelf. Without a word, he walked over, his large frame easily reaching the book, and handed it down to her. Their fingers brushed, and a jolt, warm and electric, shot up her arm. She snatched her hand back as if burned, her heart leaping into her throat. He gave no sign that he'd noticed, his expression as impassive as ever. Another time, he arrived to find her shivering, a thin shawl wrapped around her shoulders. The archives were deep in the stone foundations of the palace and held a permanent chill. The next day, a thick wolf pelt blanket was draped over the back of her work chair. It smelled faintly of him, of winter woods and silent strength. She wrapped it around herself, and the chill receded, replaced by a strange and unfamiliar warmth that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. He never performed warmth, but he showed it in these small, deliberate acts. He noticed the ink stains on her fingers and had a pot of citrus-scented soap delivered. He observed her squinting in the dim light and had new, brighter lanterns installed. Each action was an offering, not a demand, a quiet acknowledgement of her existence that no one else had ever bothered to give. She began to look forward to his visits, to the low rumble of his voice and the comfortable silence that fell between them. She started leaving out books she thought might interest him. Histories of the border wars, treatises on ancient magic. He would look them over, a faint, almost imperceptible softening around his eyes, and they would discuss them. In these moments, she was not an omega and he was not a king. They were two minds, finding a rare and quiet connection in a dusty room. But the court had not forgotten her. Her new position, her proximity to the king, bred resentment. Whispers followed her in the corridors. Lord Kalen, his pride still smarting from the king's public summons of her, was the most venomous. He and his allies saw her as an upstart, a flaw in the king's judgment. The threat started small. A crucial scroll would go missing from her desk. A newly cataloged section would be mysteriously disordered overnight. Elara dealt with it quietly, working late to repair the damage, refusing to run to the king for every petty act of sabotage. She would not prove them right. She would not be helpless. Then one evening, as she was leaving the archives, Kalen and two of his cronies cornered her in a deserted hallway. The king's little pet, Kalen sneered, blocking her path. His scent was sharp with aggression. Do you really think sorting his dusty papers makes you one of us? You're still a broken little nothing, a wolfless freak. Elara stood her ground, her heart pounding. Her empathy screamed at her, a cacophony of their malice, their jealousy, their brutish pleasure in her fear. Let me pass, Lord Kalen. Or what? He laughed, stepping closer. Will you bore me with a history lecture? His friends chuckled, closing in behind her. There was nowhere to run. She was trapped. She braced herself, expecting the shove, the push, the humiliation. That is enough. The voice was quiet, but it sliced through the tension like a blade of ice. King Theron emerged from the shadows at the end of the hall. He hadn't raised his voice, hadn't moved quickly, but his presence saturated the air, thick and suffocating with power. The primal, terrifying authority of an alpha king. Kalen and his friends froze, their bravado evaporating instantly. They visibly shrank, their heads bowing in submission, the instincts of their wolves overriding their foolish pride. Theron's gaze was not on them. It was on Elara. He saw her pale face, her trembling hands, the defiant set of her jaw. His eyes, usually so controlled, were blazing with a cold, contained fury. "Lady Elara is the royal archivist," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "She is a member of my personal household. An insult to her is an insult to me. Do you understand, Lord Kalen?" Kalen couldn't speak. He just nodded, his throat working. "Leave," Theron commanded. The single word was a physical force. The three alphas scrambled to obey, practically falling over each other in their haste to escape. When they were gone, the hall was silent again. Theron walked toward her, the fury in his eyes banking, replaced by a deep, unsettling concern. "Are you harmed?" he asked, his voice returning to its normal, low rumble. "No, Your Majesty. I am fine." Her voice was shakier than she wanted. "They will not bother you again," he promised. He reached out, his hand hovering in the air for a moment, before he gently brushed a stray strand of hair from her cheek. The touch was feather light, but it sent a tremor through her entire body. "Thank you," she whispered, her gaze falling to the floor. "This is no longer just about the archives, Elara," he said, his use of her given name a shock that made her look up. "Their resentment is a danger to you. I cannot have you walking these halls alone." "I do not need a guard," she protested, her pride stinging. "No," he agreed, his eyes holding hers. "You don't. You need a reason for being at my side that the court cannot question. A reason they must respect." Her mind raced, but she couldn't fathom what he meant. Servant? Ward? Neither would stop the whispers. "The archives are now a royal priority," he continued, his mind clearly working far ahead of hers. "Your work is too vital to be left to chance. From now on, you will work in the private library adjoining my study. You will take your meals with me. You will be housed in the royal wing. You will be seen, always, under my direct and undeniable protection." He was pulling her closer, deeper into the heart of the storm. It was a terrifying, exhilarating prospect, to be so near him, so constantly under his watch. But why? The question slipped out, vulnerable and honest. "Why do this for me?" He looked at her then, and for the first time, she saw past the king, past the warrior, and glimpsed the man beneath. She saw a profound loneliness, a weariness with the lies and ambitions of his court, and a deep, abiding hunger for something genuine. "Because," he said, his voice raw, "you are the first person in a decade who has not wanted something from me. You simply are. And that is a peace I have not known." He was wrong. She did want something from him. She wanted this feeling of being seen, of being valued, of being safe, to never end. And that terrified her more than any bully in a dark corridor. Chapter 3. Life in the royal wing was a gilded cage. Elara's new quarters were luxurious, a stark contrast to her simple room in the scholars' wing. But the proximity to the king was a constant, simmering tension. She did, as he had decreed, take her meals with him in his private dining room. The first few times were agonizingly awkward. The silence was a living thing between them, broken only by the clink of silverware. But slowly a new rhythm emerged. He would ask about her day, about the texts she was translating. She would ask about the matters of state she overheard from his study. He spoke of trade disputes and border patrols, not as a king reciting his duties, but as a man grappling with heavy burdens. She spoke of etymology and forgotten histories, not as a scholar showing off, but as someone sharing the things that brought her joy. She also began to meet the others, The family he was building in the margins. There was Seraphina, the king's chief strategist, a woman with eyes the color of faded violets, whose fey bloodline made the other nobles nervous. She saw patterns in troop movements and political alliances that no one else could. Her mind, a brilliant, terrifying tapestry of logic and intuition. She greeted Elara with a sharp, appraising nod. "He has good instincts," was all she said, a compliment that felt like a coronation. There was Ronan, a blind seer who served as the king's spy master. His network of informants was legendary, built not on gold but on loyalty. Ronan navigated the palace with an unnerving grace, his head tilted as if listening to the secrets the very stones whispered. He smiled when Elara was introduced, a genuine, warm expression. "The air is cleaner around you, little mouse," he'd said, his sightless eyes seeming to see more of her than anyone. "The king's chambers have been stale for too long. They were all outcasts in their own way, misfits whose unique talents were feared or misunderstood by the traditional pack structure. Theron had not just given them sanctuary, he had given them power, weaving their strengths into the very fabric of his reign. He had built his court not on bloodlines and brute force, but on rare and specialized skills. And somehow, he believed she belonged among them. The thought was both humbling and frightening. What was her skill? Organizing books? Enduring insults? Her quiet empathy felt like a parlor trick next to Seraphina's strategic genius or Ronan's foresight. The threat from the court did not vanish. It simply changed tactics. Open aggression was no longer possible under the king's watchful eye, so it festered into poison. Rumors began to circulate that she was a witch who had ensorcelled the king, that she was a spy for a rival kingdom, that her wolfless state was a divine curse that would taint the throne. Elara did her best to ignore it, focusing on her work, on the quiet comfort of her evenings with Theron. But the poison seeped in, reopening old wounds, making her doubt his intentions. Was she just another tool for him? A symbol of his rejection of the old ways? Or worse, was she a project? A broken thing he was trying to fix? One night, the weight became too much. They were sitting by the fire in his study, a massive tome of law open between them. He was explaining a complex point of inheritance, but she couldn't focus. The whispers she'd overheard in the hall that day echoed in her mind. Witch, curse, unnatural. "What is it?" Theron's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. He had closed the book. His entire attention was on her. "It's nothing," she lied. "Elara." He said her name with a quiet command that made lying impossible. "Tell me." She took a shaky breath. This was it. The moment she laid the truth bare. The one thing that would surely make him see how impossible this all was. He would see his mistake and send her away. The thought was a shard of ice in her chest, but the not knowing was worse. "They say I am a curse," she began, her voice small. "That my condition is an abomination. That I will bring ruin to you and your throne." She finally looked at him, her eyes pleading for him to understand. "They are not entirely wrong, Your Majesty. I am not just without a wolf. I am broken. I cannot shift. I never will. I cannot produce a true-blooded alpha heir. I cannot stand beside you as a queen should. I am barren in the ways that matter to our people." She delivered the words like a death sentence, the disqualifying truth she believed would end everything. She expected him to look away, for the warmth in his eyes to turn to cold stone. She expected pity, or perhaps even disgust. He did none of those things. He simply listened, his expression unchanging. When she finished, a long silence fell. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his gaze so intense it felt as though he were looking directly into her soul. "Is that what you believe?" he asked, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "That your worth is measured only by the presence of a wolf? Or the ability to bear a child?" "It is the measure my father used. It is the measure the world uses," she whispered. "Then the world is blind," he stated, with the flat certainty of a man declaring the sun will rise. "And your father is a fool." He stood and began to pace before the fire, his large frame casting a restless shadow on the wall. "For 10 years I have ruled this kingdom. I have fought wars, brokered treaties, and held this pack together through famine and fire. And in all that time, the alphas of the great houses have brought me nothing but their ambition, their greed, their endless posturing. They offer me their daughters, perfect specimens of breeding, each with a strong wolf and an empty heart, each one a political contract designed to further their own power." He stopped and turned to face her, his eyes blazing with a fire she had never seen before. "They want to chain me to the past, to a tradition that values muscle over mind and instinct over intellect. They offer me wolves. But a wolf is not what I require." He stepped closer, his voice dropping, becoming intimate, raw. "What I require, Elara, is a partner. I need a mind that can see the patterns in history. I need a heart that can feel the truth behind a courtier's lie. I need a soul with the strength to endure scorn and remain unbroken. I need the quiet, unshakable core of you." He was standing before her now, so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body. He reached out, not to touch her, but holding his hand, palm up, in the space between them. An offering. "Your empathy is not a parlor trick," he said, his voice soft, as if he had heard her most secret insecurity. "It is a weapon, a shield, and a compass. It is a power far rarer and more valuable than 1,000 shifting alphas. It is what I have been searching for." Tears welled in Elara's eyes, blurring his powerful form. He saw her. He truly saw all the parts of her she had been taught to hate, and he called them treasure. "I am not building an army of wolves, Elara," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I am building a family, a council. Seraphina, Ronan, you. People whose strength is not in their jaws, but in their souls. That is the future of this kingdom. That is the family I choose." She looked at his outstretched hand, then back to his face. The king who never forced, who never demanded. He was offering her a place, not just as an archivist, but as a part of his world, his future, his family. Without thinking, she raised her own trembling hand and placed it in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm and strong, and the last of her defenses crumbled. In his grasp, she did not feel like a broken omega. She felt like a queen. And she knew, with a certainty that shook her to her very foundations, that the true battle had just begun. Chapter 4. The king's declaration changed everything. It was a silent vow made in the firelight of his study, an acknowledgement that resonated deeper than any public proclamation. But word of their new arrangement, of her constant presence at his side, spread through the palace like wildfire. The rumors intensified, no longer whispers in corridors, but open speculation in the throne room. Duke Valerius, her father, requested an audience. Theron had insisted she be present. She stood to the side of the obsidian throne, a silent observer in a simple blue gown, as her father entered. He did not look at her. His eyes, full of a furious confusion, were fixed on the king. "Your Majesty," he began, his voice tight with forced deference, "the court is unsettled by your favor toward my daughter." "Is it the court that is unsettled, Duke?" Theron asked, his voice deceptively mild. Or is it you? She's unwell, her father stammered, finally flicking a contemptuous glance her way. Unfit for such proximity to the throne. She is a Valerius, and I will not have our name disgraced by this spectacle. Your name? Theron leaned forward, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. You are the one who disgraced it. You had a treasure in your house, and you treated it like refuse. You left her to be mocked and humiliated. You saw only the absence of a wolf, and you were blind to the strength of her spirit. Her name is no longer your concern. She is under my protection now. Her father paled, his fury curdling into fear. Majesty, I only mean to... I know what you mean to do. Theron cut him off. You mean to control what you do not understand. You are dismissed, Duke. Her father bowed stiffly and backed out of the throne room, his face a mask of impotent rage. Elara watched him go, feeling not sadness, but a profound and final sense of release. The hold he'd had over her, the shame he had cultivated for 22 years, was broken. But her father's anger was a symptom of a larger disease. The old guard, the powerful traditionalist alphas, saw Theron's choice as a threat to their entire way of life. If a broken Omega could be elevated, what did that say about the value of their pure bloodlines and their brute strength? Lord Kalen, now backed by Duke Valerius and others, became the focal point of their discontent. The threat, when it came, was not subtle. It was a direct assault, born of arrogance and desperation. It happened during the night of the winter solstice. The palace was celebrating, but Theron, Elara, Seraphina, and Ronan were working late in the king's study, reviewing intelligence Ronan's spies had gathered about unrest in the eastern provinces. A sudden, violent crash echoed from the antechamber, followed by the sound of splintering wood and a guard's cry of pain. Theron was on his feet in an instant, pushing Elara behind him. Ronan, the passage. Seraphina with me. Before they could move, the study doors burst inward. Lord Kalen stood there, his eyes wild, his shift already beginning, claws elongating, his face distorting. Behind him were 5 other alphas, all in the throes of a rage-fueled transformation. They were not just angry, they were berserk, their wolves untethered from their human minds. You defile the throne, Kalen snarled, his voice a guttural roar. You and your pet witch, we will cleanse this palace of your weakness. Seraphina drew a wicked-looking fey blade from her sleeve, her expression one of cold fury. Theron stood before Elara, a living shield, his own power beginning to rise, a palpable pressure in the room. But they were outnumbered. These were not soldiers, they were rabid animals. Elara's empathy, her secret, useless magic, slammed into her. The sheer force of their rage was a physical blow, a tidal wave of hatred, fear, and bloodlust. It was suffocating, agonizing. She felt Kalen's deep-seated insecurity, his terror of being seen as less than perfect. She felt her father's poisonous whispers fueling his fury. She felt the mindless pack mentality of the others, their individuality consumed by the mob. And in that overwhelming torrent of emotion, she felt something else, a thread of pain, a deep, agonizing wound at the core of the berserker Roge. Their wolves were not just angry, they were in agony. As Kalen lunged, not at Theron, but at her, a primal instinct took over Elara. She didn't run. She didn't scream. She stepped out from behind Theron's protection. Elara, no! Theron's roar was desperate. She held up a hand, not to stop Kalen physically, but as a focus. She closed her eyes and did the one thing she had always been afraid to do. She opened herself completely to the rage. She didn't fight it. She let it wash over her, through her. And as it did, She reached for that thin, screaming thread of pain within their shared fury. She found it. It was a sickness, a poison that had been fed to them, a ritualistic herb mixed with their wine, designed to sever the connection between man and wolf, to induce a state of uncontrollable rage. Someone had manipulated them, turned them into living weapons. Elara focused all her will, all her quiet, humming power on that point of pain. She didn't try to crush the rage. She tried to soothe the wound. She sent out a wave of pure, undiluted calm, a feeling of cool water on a fevered brow, of silence after a deafening noise. It was the essence of her own spirit, the quiet stillness she had cultivated in years of lonely solitude. The effect was instantaneous and bizarre. Kalen, his claws just inches from her face, skidded to a halt. A look of profound confusion crossed his distorted features. The red haze in his eyes flickered, replaced by a flicker of his human self. He stumbled back, clutching his head, a low moan escaping his lips. The other alphas faltered, their charge breaking. The psychic scream of their rage lessened, the pressure in the room easing. They looked around, bewildered as if waking from a nightmare. The violent, partial shifts receded, their bodies shrinking back to human form. Kalen fell to his knees, his body trembling. He looked up at Elara, his eyes wide with a horrified understanding. He wasn't looking at a witch. He was looking at the person who had just saved him from himself. He saw the power he had mocked, the stillness he had tried to shatter, and he understood that it was a strength far beyond his own. The room was silent, save for the ragged breathing of the exhausted alphas. Theron stared, his face a mask of utter awe. He had been ready to kill, to meet their violence with his own overwhelming force, but she had met it with something else entirely. She hadn't defeated them. She had healed them. He moved to her side, his hand finding the small of her back, a gesture of both support and possession. He looked at the kneeling, broken alphas on his floor, then back at Elara. The truth of who she was, the full scope of her power, settled over him. She was no one's victim. She was not a